Hello again team, it's Jess or JashiiCorrin and welcome back for another video. Today we have our monthly Q&A video for March. And as always, I'll be answering questions from you guys, while the footage I have here is me doing some work in my journal. Just like I did last month, for the questions that I received, if they were double-ups of questions that I've already answered before, instead of answering those again, I have links in the description box below to where you can find those answers. Getting into our questions though, the first one was, what other planning methods did you use before bullet journaling? The method that I used pretty much right before I started bullet journaling was using a Google Calendar and making use of the task list function that comes with that. Before that though, I was very much a fan of checklists, whether they be digital or on paper, and in high school I made good use of my school diary or logbook. Although each of those did have their perks, I found that I've been more consistent using my bullet journal than anything else so far. Our next question was, why do you think bullet journaling works best for you? This kind of goes with a topic I've talked about before, which is why I like bullet journaling. But I'd have to say it's probably because it's a forgiving system. It's okay to skip a week, skip a day, all that kind of stuff. But also because I'm the one setting up all of my spreads, it's really flexible. So I can have spreads and layouts that will work for me, and not include the stuff that won't. Our next question was, have you practiced your handwriting? So I haven't actively practiced my handwriting before, but I have very much noticed that comparing my first bullet journal to my more recent ones, there has been a gradual improvement in how my handwriting looks. It is also good to mention that the all-caps style of writing that I use in my bullet journal isn't actually what my usual everyday handwriting looks like. My normal handwriting is much more akin to an italicized Comic Sans. Are you going to do another month of planning with me series this year? I hope that I'll get a chance to, but at this stage I don't have any plans for when that would be. It's really about finding a period of time where I'm not too busy, and at the moment, well, it's certainly not now. Last year I was, I don't know if fortunate's the right word. We had lockdown, didn't really have a lot going on, so I was able to do it then. But yes, I am hoping to do another month of planning with me this year. I got quite a few questions related to staying motivated to use my journal, whether I use my journal every day, and how to get back on track when I'm not using it. So rather than answering all those separately, I figured I'd bundle them into one. No, I do not use my journal every single day. In fact, I actually find that in my busiest parts of life, so for instance at the moment, that's actually when I end up neglecting my journal the most. Which seems very counterintuitive. My journal is supposed to help me organize myself, and when I most need that organization, I'm not using it. I think it's kind of a mental game. My mind thinks, why are you spending time writing in your journal when you should be spending time actually doing things and getting things done? Something that I'm continuously working on. I do have a separate video about how to keep up with your bullet journal, how to keep yourself motivated to get into it and work on it. So do make sure to check out the links below for that one. But one of the things that I've been finding to help at the moment is essentially setting the bar low for myself. I'll tell myself, okay, for the next 2 minutes we're going to get into our journal, write things down, check things off. Keeping it at this small increment of time means that I'm more likely to actually get into it, and then once I get started, I'm more likely to continue for longer than 2 minutes. Sometimes we just have to take the just do it approach. Another thing to note is, if you're finding that you don't have a lot of motivation to get into your journal and use it, it's good to have a closer think about that and identify why is it that you're not motivated to get in there. Is it because you find the spreads boring and you need to change things up? Is it because you're finding your spreads too complicated and too time-consuming to fill in? As I said, I go into more detail in that other video, so do be sure to watch that one if you hadn't already. I will say though that even when I'm finding using my bullet journal to be a bit of a chore, I do try to get into it at least once a week. I find that that's the absolute minimum that I can use it and still feel semi-organized. If you weren't a science teacher or a content creator, what would you be? Well, initially when I was thinking about university courses, I wanted to go into radiology, so I guess I'd probably be a radiologist. It just so happens that I kind of forgot that deadlines were a thing, so I didn't get onto looking into how to apply until after the due date had already passed. Wah wah. Our next question was, what Facebook groups do you recommend for bullet journaling? So the one that I most commonly refer to is Bullet Journal Junkies. I also quite like bullet journal spreads, and I like the Archer and Olive community group. Of course, we also have the JashiiCorrin community, which is a Facebook group as well, which more often than not the posts in there are related to bullet journaling. I'll have all of those linked in the description, so if you want to check them out, do make sure to refer to those. How do you avoid overlap when colouring in your journal? So by this we're referring to when you're using something like a Tombow and you're colouring in a section. When one stroke of the pen overlaps another, you get a darker section wherever that overlap was. And really the answer to this is that I avoid it poorly. But there are also some other things to consider. I find that how noticeable that dark spot in the overlap really is depends both on how fast you're working and you're colouring in, and also what paper you're using. In the Archer and Olive, because it is uncoated paper, it means that those sections of overlapped strokes do show up quite noticeably. But if you're using something like the LT 1917, the colour variation that you get from that overlap isn't quite as noticeable or not quite as intense. Of course, using paper that thin comes with its own set of challenges, so I guess the question really is, how do we make the overlap less noticeable on Archer and Olive style paper? Or uncoated paper? So as I said before, it does also depend on how fast you're working with your colouring. If you colour in a section quickly, it's usually less noticeable where those overlaps are, so you do get a fair bit more consistency in the colour of the section overall. Otherwise, what you can do is that as you put strokes down, you just need to be really careful that you don't have overlapping sections. That is a lot more challenging though. The option that I usually like to go with is that I do leave the overlaps in, because I find that they're just really hard to avoid. But I'll make sure that I'm doing all of my strokes of colour in the same direction, so at least I have some consistency in that respect. If you have the overlaps and then you also have colour strokes going in a bunch of different directions, it ends up looking more messy. Whereas if you have the overlap but all the strokes are in the same direction, then it's not quite as bad. Do you still use Notion? How do you decide what to track digitally versus in your bullet journal? So yes, I do still use Notion, though just like my bullet journal in this busy period of life, the amount that I use it has dropped. The main things that I'm using Notion for still are my running task list to record things that I don't want to do this week or any week that I already have set up, and also my teacher planner and content planner sections. The biggest things that I consider in terms of whether to put information in Notion versus my bullet journal are 1. How I'm going to use the information I'm trying to store, 2. How much information I'm trying to store, and 3. When I want to use that information. So in order, if the information I'm wanting to store is something that I'm going to be using on the computer, for instance a website to some inspiration or something like that, I'll store that in Notion. In terms of how much information, if it's going to take a lot of writing, well, my typing is faster and a bit more practical than handwriting, so that kind of thing I'll store in Notion too. For instance, if I want to scaffold a video, say. And as I mentioned before with the when, if it's an immediate task or a this week task, I'll put that in my bullet journal, but if it's more of a thought, musing, task for someday maybe, that will go in Notion. How do your media to consume pages work? So if we start by looking at my TV show spread, you can see I have one larger column to write down the title of the TV show. I have a box on the left here to indicate whether it's partially finished, not yet started, or completely finished. And then the boxes over this side are for the seasons. So for instance, if we look at Avatar: The Legend of Korra, this one I have completely finished. It has 4 seasons and you can see all 4 of those seasons coloured in. For the remaining seasons in that row, I just filled them in black so I knew those seasons don't actually exist. The reason that I haven't drawn out all of the lines here, in particular all of these lines, is for some shows they have more than just the number of seasons that would fit on one row. So for instance, if we look at RuPaul's Drag Race, you can see it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 seasons in one row, but we're currently on season 13. Which is why I haven't ruled a little dividing line here, because I'm going to make it so that however many seasons or rows of seasons I need, that's how big the space on this side is going to be. So for instance, let's just say there ends up being 36 seasons. My line would end up being put in here. So it would take up 1, 2, 3 rows, so 12 times 3 being 36. Means that once I finish all 36 seasons, I can colour in this big section here. For TV shows that aren't quite finished yet, you can see I haven't gone and filled in the black sections here. So New Girl I'm pretty sure is finished, I just don't know how many seasons there are, so I haven't coloured it in. But Fate, the Winx saga, we've only had one season so far. So I'm not too sure how many seasons there are going to be, so I don't want to go and fill this in with black just yet. So that's how my stuff for TV shows works, but for movies, games, books, it's a little bit different. In terms of movies, you can see I have 4 columns here, so in each of those I have one smaller column, and that'll be divided in the same way that we have the TV shows with the little box. And then that larger space is just to write the title of the movie, so 4 columns to do that. In books I just have 2 larger ones, so again, little space on the side to record when I have read the book, and then the title and author of the book in this larger section. Games, again, similar, but I'm not going to write an author for a game or like a producer or anything, it's just a space for the title. And then a similar idea for skills as well, just a bit more space to write in what that skill is. Another question we had related to my media consumed pages was, are using the tabs in your journal effective? Well, on these ones, because I'm mainly using them for the title of the page, in that respect, yes, they are effective. But outside of that, they're really just for decoration for me. I don't really use them to flip to one page in particular, especially when I only have 4 pages to flip through. Our next question was, how can you save space in your journal to make it last longer? This one was related to how long I use my journals for. So I like to use 2 journals a year, each of them takes up 6 months. But as well as that, I of course also have my long-term collections journal, which you guys just saw in the last shot. I find that having a long-term collections journal does help me to save space in my journal as well. Because I have that long-term collections journal, it means that when I set up a new bullet journal, I don't need to transfer over any of those long-term collections. So collections like swatches, reference pages, so things I'm going to want to refer to for longer than 6 months. Other ways that I like to save space in my journal are things like doing 1-page weeklies, eliminating pages that I don't use very often, so things like a future log. I don't use a future log, so I don't need to put it in. And also for March in particular, combining my tracker pages. I decided to put my habits and steps trackers on one page rather than having them on 2 separate pages this time. Also, if you can take things that you'd normally put into a monthly tracker and include them on your weekly spreads instead, this is another way that you can save space. For instance, rather than having a separate meal log taking up a full spread in my journal for this month, I've instead put my meal log on my weeklies. Our next question was, what is your favourite video game right now? And it also came with a question of, will you start Animal Crossing? I don't actually have a Switch, Vogel has a Switch but I don't have one, so probably not going to be starting Animal Crossing. And although I'm not actually playing any video games right now, my favourite ones would include the Assassin's Creed series and Life is Strange. And also the most recent Tomb Raider series as well, those ones are all really fun. What is a spread or layout that you wanted to try but haven't yet? This was a tricky question because honestly most of the time when I'm thinking about things I want to try in my bullet journal that I haven't yet, they're mainly theme related. But I did come up with a couple of ideas for this question. I think it would be cool to try some more kind of free-form weeklies that don't have like ruled lines, even-sized boxes, all of that kind of stuff. That's certainly outside of my current comfort zone. And also bullet journal layouts that are based on mind maps. So whether that be like idea mind maps or like about me pages or months in review. I always love how the mind map style ends up looking, and it would be cool to try one of those. What has been the most functional spread in your bullet journal? So this one's actually coming up towards the end of the video, but that would have to be my lesson scheduler or my term planner. This one just gives me an overview of all of the lessons that I have for each day of the week, for 3 weeks per page or 6 weeks per spread. This one has pretty much been a staple in my bullet journal. I really enjoy it, and it's certainly one of the pages that I refer to the most. Our next question was, how has bullet journaling improved your life? And I'd say that outside of just the regular kind of organization system that bullet journaling is to me, it's also really helped me get into other channels of personal development. So things like intentionalism and decluttering, mindfulness, gratitude, all of that kind of stuff. Of course, it's also helped me develop my creativity, so not only with my work in my bullet journal, but with my video making as well. I didn't have a YouTube before I started bullet journaling. Do you think there will be a time that you move on or quit bullet journaling? This is actually something that I think about quite a bit, especially having a YouTube channel that's mostly dedicated to bullet journaling related content. Of course, this is something that I really enjoy doing, so if I'm not bullet journaling anymore, then what would I be making videos on? I feel like it is pretty likely that at some stage I'll probably move on from bullet journaling, but I also think that the chances of me completely moving away from paper planning is pretty slim. So even if I'm not necessarily bullet journaling, I will still be planning. I also got several questions about picking monthly color palettes and themes, but instead of trying to answer that in this video, I actually have a video coming up next month that looks into those. So if you hadn't already, do make sure to subscribe to my channel to make sure that you don't miss out on those ones. If you are looking for answers to any of the questions that we have on the screen at the moment, do make sure to check out the links in the description box below because I have links to my previous Q&A videos where I've answered those ones. My question of the day for you guys though, do you have any days where you don't use your bullet journal? As I said, I do certainly have days and sometimes days in a row where I don't get into my journal, but I do make sure that even if I'm having an off season, I try to get into my journal at least once a week. As always team, thank you for watching. If you liked today's video, please do make sure to give it a big thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to my channel to see more on planning, productivity and personal development. Until next time, bye!